Okay, hi Chester, how are you?
Hi, Douglas. I'm just fine. Glad to be here.
Well, thank you for coming on this show. It's a pleasure to have you on. We'll have to talk about the elephant in the room right away because it's enormous behind you on a music stand. From the potato to Star Trek and beyond, memoirs of a rocket scientist. So you were a rocket scientist.
Well, that's what they tell me. Now, I've had the privilege of working with the real thing, the guys that put us on the moon, and so I'm a second stringer as far as those guys are concerned.
You worked at NASA?
No, I've worked in private industry, in the aerospace industry, a little bit for the government, but mostly from private corporations. Also had my own business as a consultant for a number of years.
Okay, but you made a contribution to Apollo 11?
No, I didn't. I worked with the guys that did the engines for Apollo 11.
I certainly remember that. I was 7 years old at the time, but it was an amazing thing to watch on
It was
TV.
extraordinary. And I was very privileged to spend a number of years working with the guys that actually did that job. So that was quite an experience learning from those guys.
Oh, I bet. So I understand the Star Trek reference because you did write a script for one of the Star Trek episodes. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I teamed up with Judy Burns. She was the senior partner in this effort, and we wrote a speculative script for Star Trek. And she had some connections that actually got the script written. So we were called up for a story conference at the producer's office, and we were informed that they were going to buy our script, and things went from there. And quite an adventure, I must say. It didn't turn out the way we expected. There's a lot to talk about, which obviously I discuss in some detail in the book.
Oh, which Star Trek was this? Because there's been several incarnations
Well,
of
there's a
Star.
whole bunch. This
Yeah.
was the original series back in the 1960s,
Oh, okay.
and this was the third season. And the episode was the Tholian Web, which was, my understanding is, it's one of the most popular of the original series.
I'm trying to think. Was that the one where the ship kept crisscrossing and making what looked like a spider's web, trying to block the
Yeah,
that
yeah,
one?
exactly that. That was the one. And my understanding is that won an Emmy for special effects.
Wow. Okay. So you wrote that,
Judy and I wrote it.
Judy, and
Yes,
you wrote. Okay,
I,
well,
I
that's
wrote.
fantastic.
I wrote my pieces of it, and she wrote her pieces of it, and then we, exchanged pieces and modified each other's stuff. I was basically the science guy, and she was basically the people guy. And I think, we did the science pretty well because I'm a physics guy, and she did the people stuff really well because she's really good at that sort of thing. And the combination seemed to have worked out extremely well.
Did you meet Gene Roddenberry?
Just briefly, um, we were escorted up to his office. We had to go up a very narrow stairway up to the second floor of the building, or maybe this building next door. And he said hi. He says, "I wanted to meet you. Thank you very much." And that was pretty much the end of it. It was,
Well, okay. Hey, better than nothing, I think. Yeah.
yeah, right.
Wow, that's fantastic. All right. Well, you know what? I have that whole series on DVD, dusty on my shelf somewhere, and I'm going to pull it out and watch it tonight just to see. Did you get credit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Made a
Okay.
lot of money from that. Paid for a couple of years of graduate school. I was a graduate student at the time. Judy had just graduated, so we had met as students together at the university. Um, yeah, I have to tell you, working in Hollywood can be very lucrative.
Well, it's
Uh,
feast or famine for the most part. Yeah.
yeah, it can be. Well, the interesting thing was there were so many residuals that came from that show that for 50 years after it went on the air, I was getting checks from the Writers Guild for 20, $30 a year
Oh, that's
for
great.
residuals on the thing.
And actually, residuals was something fairly new at they just started because I know people who did shows in the late 50s, early 60s, they get nothing. But by the late 60s, residuals had become sort of a reality, you know?
Yeah, and thanks to the Writers Guild, I have to say, It was a privilege to be a member. You don't get into the guild without invitation, by the way. So, and you have to have had at least one script that was on the air.
Well, let's shift this over to your book. So we covered the Star Trek part. Tell me a little about the potato.
I can't. My publisher says that I'm not supposed to talk about that. I'm supposed to leave something for your imagination and further research.
Oh, okay.
I will say this about the potato. What I was involved in was very dangerous, and I have the scars to prove it.
Well, let's just go for an overview then. So this is a memoir of your life, and I'm going to make a guess that the potato has something to do with some of your adventures. I see whitewater rafting on the cover, and I see saxophone. Do you play the sax?
I used to play the sax. I was a semi-professional musician in high school, and then played in the concert band at the university. But after I left the university, there were really no further opportunities for me to continue that. So I kind of drifted away from playing woodwinds. And I did play a little bit of the classical guitar, just messing around with that for a while. And then right now, in my very old age, I'm trying to learn how to play the piano, which I find is a real challenge.
Well, why don't you give us a little overview of the adventure part of your life? I mean, whitewater rafting, when did you do that?
My first whitewater experience was, I think, around 1972 or 73. I can't remember the year, and I have to look it up. And my first trip was a float trip through the Grand Canyon. That was a rowing rafts through the Grand Canyon. It was a 2-week trip. And all I can say about that experience is it completely changed me. It changed the way I look at the world. And, things went on from there. That anybody who's ever had that experience will understand it. If you haven't had it, I strongly recommend it. But I promise you, you will not be the same person when you come out after that experience as you went in. It really does change the way you look at the world.
Did you have a brush with death?
No, not on that trip. I had a lot of excitement though, but yeah, well, I had to swim some rapids, if that's what you mean. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess you could say that I had some difficult experiences being at the bottom of the river.
So you got thrown out of the raft, obviously.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, is there some kind of a moral lesson to this book? I mean, I see a whole bunch of different things on your talking points. Let me just read one to you and you can respond to this. Realizing Mother Nature doesn't care means seeing nature in a different way than the city-bred folk.
Yeah, well, it's exactly that. Nature is nature. I mean, you're in it. Nature has its pleasures and it also has its hazards. And if you're not aware of the hazards, you can get hurt really bad. Yeah, so it's up to you as an individual, both as an individual and with your companions and taking care of your companions, to be aware of the hazards that are there and to avoid them when you can and to learn how to get through them when you have to face them. Going down a big rapid, if you get thrown in the water, you're in the midst of a situation where survival is a matter of life or death, and nature doesn't care whether you drown or come through it alive. And of course, the way you handle situations like that is you've rehearsed certain things, but you also have a good life jacket on that helps you get back to the surface. And and then you've been cautioned about how to deal with certain situations. Again, you can find yourself in a situation which you can recover from, but you've got to be alert to what you're doing and what the hazards are, what the nature of the hazards are.
Okay, you said that after this whitewater rafting trip that it changed your perspective on how you looked at the world. What changed? Can you give us a little idea of that?
Yeah, I think I was probably a little more relaxed. I possibly was a little bit frantic, a little aggressive going in. When I came out, I was just substantially tranquilized by the experience. And I have to tell you, everybody noticed it. I mean, I got a lot of comments from my friends about how different I was coming out of that experience. And of course, the experience was a great pleasure. And that's why I continued to do that. So I continued going on rivers. I continued going around the world. And ultimately, I learned how to row a boat. My last experience in the Grand Canyon, I actually rowed a boat through the canyon. And that was I talk about that a little bit in the story. And that was quite an interesting thing to be able to do, to actually be in control of the boat while we're going down through the big rapids.
People talk about high points in your life. Have you had your high point yet?
I hope not. Yeah, no, it'd be nice to have more. I've had a series of high points, no question about that. But hopefully there's still more stuff going on. I mean, I'm in the middle of a very interesting experiment right now, an adventure, and that is publishing this book and letting people know a little bit more about me than most, even my close friends don't know about. Of course, my wife, Sarah, we were very close, so she knew all those secrets. But let me touch on that a little bit. The book came about because my wife died very suddenly. She had a heart failure, and that threw me into total despondency. I mean, if you've had an experience like that, you'll understand. If you haven't had the experience, there's just no words to describe what it's like. So what I found was that I got solace in actually starting to write stuff. I started writing stories that I had told Sarah or she had picked out of my journals. And what I found was that I started to recover my equilibrium by actually writing some of this stuff down, and all true stories, all things that have happened to me in the past, but just the pleasure of creating a story, crafting a story. One after another, I gradually was able to recover my balance and build a brand new life as a consequence of that. So that tragedy, it's a deep canyon in my life, but in some sense, it's also a high point, because that also changed me, and I think it changed me for the better.
When did she pass away?
About 15 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So I've been on my own quite a long time now.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. So that really was the inspiration to start writing this book, was her death?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was. Right. Now, on my travels, whitewater travels and other things, I kept a daily journal. And so I had continuous practice in writing. And the journal was really good because I would write the day's events in the afternoon when we set up camp. And then very, very often I would read the day's events around the campfire to my companions on the excursions. And those are people who were there. They saw what happened. So, boy, I had to be completely honest. You can't fake it when you've got critics of that magnitude sitting around the campfire with you. So I got in the habit of just being a reporter, being a journalist and writing the stuff down as it happened. And turns out you get enough practice, you can become really pretty good at putting words on paper.
Well, writing is a craft, and people get better as they practice, just like piano. So
Yeah.
I've been a piano player since I was 3 years old. So if you're starting now, God bless you, and keep at it.
Yeah, you know what kind of pain I'm going through. Well, I have to tell you one thing about that. And, I was a pretty good woodwinds player, and sort of reasonably good at the guitar, not really at the professional level. But the piano is so radically different and so radically harder than those two instruments that it's a real struggle to change my brain so that I can look at a bass clef and a treble clef simultaneously. It's just not an easy thing to do,
We're just about out of time. I'm sorry to cut you off, but do you have one last sort of closing, I don't know, words of wisdom, something take away from the book?
Yeah, I would say this, that, life is full of stress. When you change a job, get married, getting married is a good stressor. You can either look back at that as a stressful time, or you can say, you know, I learned a lot from that experience. That really was an adventure. And that's kind of the way I've looked at life. I've had ups and downs both, great triumphs along the way, and I've also had great tragedies along the way. And I look at each one of those as an enriching experience. And so you can call it an adventure, or you can attach other words to that. But I think it psychologically, it's very helpful if you just look back on the experiences that you've had and figure out what you learned from those experiences and treat them as maybe even from a neutral or a positive point of view rather than a negative point of view. I think it helps a great deal in keeping your balance and getting through the day-to-day activities.
Well, Chester, thanks so much for coming on. It was nice meeting you, nice talking to you. Do you have a website you want to give out?
Yes, I do. It's one word, chesterlrichards.com, and easily accessible. Or you can go on any of the search engines and just type in Chester L. Richards. You'll get vectored to it. The books are available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. They're both available as of yesterday. And so if you're interested in reading a bunch of true life adventure stories with some very, very interesting people that I've run into along the way, at least half the book talks about some really extraordinary individuals that I've been privileged to know. So you'll find that aspect fascinating as well, I hope.
And if nothing else, pick up the book so you can find out about the potato. Right?
Yes. Yeah, well, it's in there, and
okay.
It could raise a few hairs, I'll say that.
Chester, thanks so much for coming.